You'll never believe what happened when the police stepped inside a seemingly ordinary suburban home. What they thought would be a routine visit turned into a chilling discovery that would shake their entire perception of the family they were there to investigate. What started as a simple tip-off to local authorities would quickly evolve into one of the most twisted and shocking cases they had ever encountered. As the door to that secret room creaked open, the officers had no idea what horrors awaited them, and neither do you, yet. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why this case sent shockwaves through the entire town and left everyone questioning what's hiding behind the walls of the seemingly normal households around us. But here's the thing, you're not just going to watch the story, you're going to feel it. This is more than just a crime story. This is a deep dive into the darkness that can lurk just beneath the surface of what we call normal. I promise you, as you listen, you're going to start thinking, could this happen to someone I know? Could this be someone in my neighborhood? Let me ask you this. How well do you really know the people closest to you? Are there secrets in their lives, or even your own, hidden so deep that no one would ever suspect? We all have that one family, right? You know, the one that seems perfect from the outside. They look like the picture of suburban bliss, loving parents, polite children, and a house with that white picket fence. But, as you're about to find out, nothing is ever as perfect as it seems. Behind the neat lawns, behind the smiles, behind the doors that look like they belong in a magazine, can lie unimaginable horror. And it only takes one small crack in the facade for the truth to come rushing out, exposing everything for what it really is. As you stick with me through this video, you'll be introduced to a man who everyone thought was a good father. His name was Richard Adams, and on the surface, he had it all. A beautiful wife, 2 kids, a well-kept home, a solid job. But as they say, appearances can be deceiving. You see, Richard Adams had a secret. A secret that nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted. A secret that would make even the toughest, most seasoned officers freeze in shock. And as the officers pushed further into the house that day, they soon realized that what they were about to uncover inside one single, hidden room would change everything. Imagine being in their shoes for a second. You're walking through a home you thought you knew all too well, a place that had been thought of as a refuge, a place of comfort. But as you approach the room in question, you get that unsettling feeling in your gut. There's something off about this place. And then, as the door opens, the walls seem to close in around you. It's not just the sheer shock of what's inside, but the realization that the man you once thought you knew, maybe even looked up to, was hiding something from you, from all of you. Something so horrifying that even now, you can't quite comprehend it. I want you to take a moment and think about this. Have you ever been so completely shocked by something that you could barely process it? Well, that's exactly what happened to the officers as they walked into Richard Adams's secret room. What they found behind that door didn't just haunt them, it stayed with them long after they left that house. And now, I'm going to take you inside that room. I'm going to walk you through the same twisted path the detectives took, piece by piece, as they uncovered what this father was truly capable of hiding. But there's a twist. You won't hear everything all at once. I want to keep you on the edge of your seat, just like the officers were that day. I'm going to reveal the shocking details, but I'll hold back just enough to keep you watching, to keep you invested. You came here because you want to know what's behind the door. And I'm going to deliver. But you have to stay with me to see it through. The pieces of this story are going to come together slowly, and each moment is going to build on the last, until you find yourself unable to look away. The longer you watch, the more you'll question just how well we can ever really know the people around us. It's going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about trust, family, and the monsters that might be living next door. Let me set the stage for you a bit more. Richard's family lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the heart of Pennsylvania. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other, kids played in the street, and the sound of lawnmowers hummed on Saturdays. Richard was the type of guy who seemed like he had it all under control. He'd wave at neighbors as they walked by, offer a smile when anyone stopped to chat, and kept to himself mostly. His wife, Jessica, was a stay-at-home mom who spent her days taking care of their 2 kids, Emma and Noah, both under 10. From the outside, everything looked perfect. No signs of trouble. No indications of something amiss. And certainly, nobody suspected that Richard was hiding the most disturbing secret in the house that his family called home. But it was a phone call, a seemingly routine welfare check, that set everything in motion. The police were called after a concerned neighbor noticed some strange behavior coming from the house. It wasn't anything major at first, just a slight change in how Richard was acting, a shift in his usual demeanor. But as they arrived at the home, something felt off. The energy in the air was thick, heavy. A sense of dread hovered like a storm cloud. As the officers entered, they could tell something was wrong, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it just yet. They knocked on the door, and Richard answered with that same charming smile, greeting them like he always did. But the officers were quick to notice that his eyes seemed to dart around the room in a way that made them uneasy. Was he hiding something? Could he know why they were there? But Richard insisted everything was fine, that there was no need for concern. Yet, as they walked through the house, something didn't sit right. A strange tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Now, here's where the story takes a terrifying turn. As the officers made their way through the house, one of them, Officer Carter, noticed something odd.
A door.
A door that didn't seem to fit in with the rest of the house. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow hallway, almost like it was trying to stay hidden. The officers tried to get Richard to explain it away, but his reaction was strange. Nervous. Almost too nervous. They weren't buying it anymore. Something was definitely off. So, they asked him outright, "What's behind that door?" Richard hesitated for a moment, before muttering something about storage. But the officer wasn't convinced. The door had a lock on it. And not just any lock, a heavy-duty one, the kind that would only be used to secure something valuable, something important, something dangerous. The tension escalated. Richard's face grew pale. His hands trembled as he reluctantly unlocked the door and stepped back, as if offering the officers a chance to walk in first. What they found inside that room would haunt them forever, and by the time you're done watching, it will haunt you too. But I can't just give it away right now. I need you to keep watching. Trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when everything changes. Stay tuned, because the truth, what they found inside that secret room, will leave you in shock. You won't believe it, but it's real. It's terrifying. And it's coming. Keep watching. You won't want to look away. As the door creaked open, the officer's steps slowed, and the air grew colder. The room beyond that hidden door was far from what anyone could have expected. It wasn't just cluttered storage or something as mundane as extra household items. No, it was something far darker, more sinister, a secret that Richard Adams had gone to great lengths to protect. But before they could even fully process what they were looking at, their minds began to race with questions. What could have led Richard to hide something like this? How had he kept it under wraps for so long? And more importantly, how many people were involved in this twisted secret? The officers had walked into a nightmare, but as they glanced at each other in stunned silence, they realized something even more unsettling. Richard Adams wasn't acting alone. In the days leading up to that fateful discovery, Richard's behavior had become increasingly erratic. People in the neighborhood started to notice that something was off. His wife, Jessica, had become withdrawn, almost as if she were carrying a burden she couldn't share. The couple's two young children, Emma and Noah, who had always been energetic and bubbly, began showing signs of distress. The changes were subtle at first. Small things like missed school activities, hushed conversations behind closed doors, and strange, unexplained absences. But soon, these small shifts became more pronounced. The once perfect family seemed to be crumbling from the inside, yet no one outside their home could put a finger on why. Neighbors who had once exchanged pleasantries with Richard at the mailbox now avoided eye contact. It was as though the very presence of the Adams family had started to feel wrong. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a rough patch, perhaps an issue with Richard's job or the pressures of raising a young family. But that didn't explain the sudden isolation. No one had seen Jessica at the local park in weeks, and Emma and Noah were no longer playing with the other kids. Richard was always there, though, lurking in the background, watching everything, but never truly participating. It was the kind of subtle behavior that didn't necessarily raise alarm bells on its own, but when combined with the other signs, it painted a picture of a family in turmoil, one that no one knew how to interpret. But the deeper the officers dug, the more they began to see the cracks that had been forming long before their visit. It seemed that Richard's recent behavior had roots far deeper than anyone realized. In fact, his troubles went back further than anyone in the neighborhood could have guessed. A few months before the welfare call, Richard had been struggling with financial problems. He'd been laid off from his job at a local tech firm and had spent weeks trying to find another position, but nothing seemed to stick. Jessica had grown increasingly concerned, as the financial strain seemed to take a toll on Richard's mental state. His anxiety, which had always been manageable, seemed to spiral out of control. He began spending long hours at home alone, his moods shifting unpredictably. The tension between him and Jessica was palpable, though they never openly discussed it in front of the children. It was as if there was an unspoken understanding between them, a tension that neither could escape, no matter how hard they tried. Despite the growing strain at home, Richard had been adamant about keeping up appearances. He maintained his outward charm and friendly demeanor when interacting with the neighbors, but something in his eyes had changed. It was subtle at first, but anyone who paid attention could see it. There was a glimmer of something cold beneath the surface, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. Some of the more observant neighbors even started to whisper, wondering if Richard's financial troubles had led him down a darker path. But no one could have predicted just how dark that path had become. Then, there was the matter of Richard's strange new friend, a man named Charles. Charles had come into the picture about a month before the officer's visit. He was a quiet, reserved man in his mid-30s, with a rugged appearance and a history that Richard had been careful to hide from everyone, including his wife. No one knew where Charles had come from or what his connection to Richard was, but the two seemed inseparable. They spent hours together, usually in Richard's garage or in the secluded parts of the property, away from the eyes of the neighbors. Jessica had never liked Charles. She had tried to voice her concerns to Richard, but he brushed her off, assuring her that Charles was just a temporary acquaintance, someone he had met during his job search. But as the days passed, Jessica became increasingly uneasy. She knew something wasn't right. She noticed Richard's behavior becoming more erratic whenever Charles was around, and it wasn't long before she started to question whether or not her husband was involved in something illegal or worse. In fact, just days before the welfare check, Jessica had confided in a close friend that she thought Richard was hiding something. She hadn't been able to put her finger on it, but she felt that the secrecy surrounding Richard's new friend and his increasingly odd behavior was leading them down a dangerous road. She had considered leaving, taking the kids, and getting away, but something stopped her. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the crushing weight of not knowing what was really going on. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled deeper into something she couldn't control. The truth was, she didn't know who her husband had become, or who he had been hiding behind the mask he'd carefully built for so long. As the officers walked further into the room, the pieces of this twisted puzzle began to slowly fall into place. But there was one thing they still didn't know, one piece of the puzzle that was missing. It wasn't just Richard and Charles they had to worry about. It was Jessica, too. The more they uncovered about Richard's secret life, the more they realized that the cracks in this family's facade ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Jessica's involvement, her knowledge of what was going on behind closed doors, was unclear, but it was undeniable that she had to have known something. But what? Was she a victim, trapped in her own home? Or was she complicit in the horrors that had unfolded there? The officers could feel it now. They were only scratching the surface. The walls of this family's house had been hiding far more than they could have ever anticipated, and the truth, whatever it was going to be even darker than they had ever imagined. There were more questions than answers, more leads to follow, and more secrets to uncover. And just as the officers were about to make the next move, the most terrifying thought crossed their minds. What if Richard wasn't the only one hiding something in that house? With every step they took, they could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. They had to dig deeper. They had to keep pushing. But the more they uncovered, the more they realized that this case wasn't just about a father's secret room. It was about everything he had been hiding all along. The officers had barely begun to process the room when something strange happened. As they continued to examine the eerie space, one of the detectives, Officer Lawson, spotted something that made his heart skip a beat. A small, locked chest sat in the far corner of the room, hidden behind a stack of old cardboard boxes. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, gathering dust in the dim light. But there was something about it that felt out of place, like it held the final piece to the puzzle they had been desperately trying to solve. Lawson's hand hovered over the chest, but as he moved closer, he realized that something wasn't right. The lock on the chest had been tampered with. It wasn't broken, but it wasn't secured properly either. It looked as if someone had been in it recently, perhaps even just hours before they arrived. With a sense of urgency, he attempted to open it, but the chest wouldn't budge. The lock was strangely resistant. At that moment, his heart raced. What was inside? And who had been trying to hide it? Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this family and about the people you trust. What Richard had been hiding wasn't just a secret. It was a nightmare, one that would take more than just the police to unravel. It would take you, the viewer, to fully understand the depths of the terror that had been concealed behind those walls, and as the truth started to unravel, the officers couldn't help but wonder, was this really the story of a broken family, or was something far more insidious lurking beneath the surface? As Lawson struggled to open the chest, Officer Martinez, who had been scanning the rest of the room, froze. He had been checking the shelves for any documents that could provide a clue, but something caught his attention. A faint smell in the air, something metallic and unpleasant. The smell was overpowering, and it seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. It didn't take long for Martinez to find the source. A hidden vent along the far wall, slightly ajar. He carefully pried it open, and when he peered inside, his face went pale. The vent led to a small compartment, and in it, he found something that shouldn't have been there, a crumpled piece of paper, partially burned, its contents barely legible. The edges were singed, but Martinez could make out enough to know that it was an address, a specific address that he recognized from earlier in the case. This address wasn't just any random location. It was tied to a woman named Eliza, someone who had a mysterious connection to Richard. In fact, just a few months before, she had been mentioned in a police report involving an unsolved case. The report had been filed by a witness who claimed to have seen Richard and Eliza together on several occasions. But the case had gone cold. Eliza had vanished, leaving behind no trace, and the connection between her and Richard was quickly dismissed as irrelevant. Or so they thought. Now, with this new clue, it seemed that their initial assumptions had been wrong. Eliza wasn't just a coincidence. She was part of something much bigger, a piece of the puzzle that had been intentionally hidden from them. And now, it appeared that someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever found her again. But just as they began to piece these new developments together, a voice broke through the tension. It was Richard's neighbor, Greg, who had been lurking near the perimeter of the house since the officers arrived. He had been strangely quiet, offering little more than the occasional glance. Now, he approached the detectives with an air of urgency, his face drawn and pale. "You shouldn't be digging any deeper," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into." Lawson and Martinez exchanged wary glances. Who was Greg to warn them off? They had only just begun to uncover the dark secrets of Richard's hidden life, and now, Greg was acting like he knew something they didn't. Was he trying to protect Richard? Or was he involved in something far more sinister? There was no way to know for sure, but the warning unsettled them both. It wasn't just a vague piece of advice. It was a threat, one they couldn't ignore. As Greg backed away, his words hung in the air, leaving the detectives to consider what he might know. Could Greg be hiding something? Was he the key to understanding the connection between Richard and Eliza? Or was he simply trying to protect his own secrets? The officers had no way of knowing, but the unease that settled in their stomachs told them that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous this case was becoming. Meanwhile, The locked chest still remained a mystery. Despite their best efforts, Lawson and Martinez couldn't seem to open it. And yet, they both knew that it was crucial to everything, the last piece of the puzzle they needed. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of urgency only grew stronger. Someone had tampered with the chest, someone who clearly didn't want them to uncover its contents. Who had been there before them, and why had they left in such a hurry? As the officers stood in the room, grappling with the mounting questions and the growing sense of dread, a noise from outside broke their concentration. The unmistakable sound of a car engine revving up. A quick glance at the window revealed the silhouette of a vehicle speeding away from the property. Too fast, too recklessly. They couldn't be sure, but it looked like someone had just made a hasty exit. Was it Richard? Or was it someone else who had been lurking in the shadows, just out of sight? And what were they trying to protect? The chase was on, but time was running out. The officers had more questions than answers, and every step they took seemed to lead them further into a labyrinth of lies, deception, and buried secrets. As they turned back to the locked chest, a chilling thought crept into their minds. What if the answers they were seeking had already been destroyed? With each passing minute, the stakes grew higher, and the tension between them and the unknown forces working against them only deepened. The truth was slipping further away. But was it still within their grasp? Or had they already gone too far, threatening to uncover a darkness that no one, least of all them, was prepared to face? The clock was ticking. And just when they thought they were getting closer to the truth, an unexpected twist left them stunned and uncertain. Was someone within their own team working against them? Could the betrayal go deeper than they had imagined? Or was this a far darker conspiracy than any of them could have anticipated? As the detectives stood on the precipice of discovery, one thing was certain. The game had just changed, and the truth was now more elusive than ever. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The very next morning, as the investigation continued to unravel the tangled threads of Richard's life, another unsettling turn of events made the case even more complicated. It wasn't just the officers and the neighbors who were on edge now. A woman named Laura, who was a childhood friend of Richard's, had been following the news of his increasingly mysterious actions with growing concern. She hadn't spoken to him in years, but something deep inside her told her that the man she once knew had changed. He wasn't the person he appeared to be, and as the days passed, she found herself drawn back into the dark history of their shared past. Laura was left frozen in disbelief. Her heart pounded in her chest as she replayed the chilling warning in her mind. Could it be someone connected to Richard? Was he sending her some kind of message through this cryptic threat? Her hands trembled as she hung up the phone, the weight of what she had just heard settling over her like a cold blanket. She couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was lurking beneath the surface. She had barely begun to unravel the hidden layers of Richard's life, and now, it seemed someone, perhaps even Richard himself, was trying to make sure that she stayed out of it. The warning was clear. They knew she was getting too close. It wasn't just the threat that unsettled Laura. Something about the message felt wrong, as if it came from someone who had been watching her for a long time. It felt personal. And then there was the coincidence, Richard's connection to the disappearance of Eliza. The same woman who had disappeared without a trace, who had somehow slipped through the cracks in the investigation. Laura had always suspected there was more to Eliza's story than anyone let on. It wasn't just a random case of a woman vanishing, it was something more calculated, more dangerous. As she sat in her dimly lit kitchen, the pieces began to fall into place. What if Richard had been involved in Eliza's disappearance? What if there was a much darker reason behind her sudden vanishing that no one had ever considered? As Laura's mind raced with these possibilities, she received an unexpected visitor. A sudden phone call, however, would pull her back into this nightmare in ways she never expected. The call came in the early hours, just as she was getting ready to head to work. The voice on the other end was distorted, unnerving, too familiar, yet almost impossible to recognize. The words were clear, though. "Stop looking into Richard, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. A man she had never seen before stood at her doorstep, a stern expression, etched into his face. His eyes were cold, like he was carrying the weight of something far darker than she could comprehend. Without introducing himself, he handed her an envelope, sealed with a wax stamp she didn't recognize. "You need to read this," he said, his voice low but firm. He didn't wait for a response before turning and walking away, disappearing into the early morning mist as mysteriously as he had appeared. Inside the envelope, Laura found a single sheet of paper with only a few words typed in block letters. "The truth lies with Richard. Don't trust anyone." She stared at the words, a chill running down her spine. What truth? And why was she being warned to trust no one? Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this some sort of clue, or just another ominous warning from the same person who had called her earlier? Laura knew she had to act fast, but the fear creeping into her chest was almost unbearable. Whoever was behind all this knew far more than they were letting on, and they weren't going to stop until they silenced her too. Meanwhile, as the investigation progressed, a new and unsettling piece of evidence came to light. One of Richard's old acquaintances, a man named Colin, had been interviewed by the detectives. Initially, Colin had been seen as nothing more than a minor figure in the investigation, a friend from Richard's past who seemed to know little more than the average person. But when the officers went through his personal history, they found something shocking. Colin had a criminal record, one that had been sealed away, hidden from public view. The charges were serious, far more than the petty offenses they had initially assumed. And what was more unsettling was the fact that Colin had been living in the same neighborhood as Richard at the time of Eliza's disappearance. The connection between Richard, Colin, and Eliza was a thread no one had dared to pull on before, but now it seemed impossible to ignore. Had Colin been involved in Eliza's disappearance, and if so, how was Richard connected? The detectives couldn't help but wonder if they were dealing with more than just a father with a dark secret. What if this web of lies went deeper than they had ever imagined? What if the mystery surrounding Eliza's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg? The more they dug into Colin's background, the more questions surfaced. There were reports of him being seen with Richard on the night of Eliza's disappearance, reports that had never been followed up on, dismissed as coincidence. But now, those same reports were beginning to take on a darker significance. And just when it seemed like the pieces were starting to fit together, the most shocking discovery came from a completely unexpected source. One of the officers, who had been working tirelessly to gather the evidence, stumbled upon something in Richard's old family records that completely contradicted everything they thought they knew about him. There, buried in the files, was a letter written by Richard's father, who had been long deceased. The letter detailed an eerie prediction, one that seemed to describe events that had happened long before anyone could have known. The letter spoke of betrayal, of a family curse, and of a secret room that had been locked away for years. The more they read, the more it became clear that Richard's father had known things about the family's past that no one, not even Richard, had ever been told. And the most chilling part? The letter ended with a single line: "The truth will never set you free. It will only destroy you." Laura, now fully entangled in this growing mystery, had no choice but to confront her own feelings of betrayal and confusion. Her past with Richard was far from simple, and now it seemed that no one could be trusted. As the story spiraled out of control, the tension in the air grew unbearable. No one knew who to trust, and the deeper they dug, the more dangerous things became. Laura's warning seemed more prophetic with each passing moment. The truth was a double-edged sword, and it was coming for them all. The detectives had to decide, would they pursue the truth, no matter how dangerous it became? Or would they pull back and risk letting the darkest secrets remain buried forever? No one knew where this road would lead, but one thing was certain. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous their pursuit became. Stay with me, because everything you thought you knew is about to change in ways you can't imagine. Days passed, each one more oppressive than the last. Laura's nights were filled with restless dreams and half-formed thoughts about Richard, the missing pieces of his life, and the cryptic warnings she had received. Every creak of the floorboards in her home, every shadow that moved across the walls, made her heart race with paranoia. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, following her every step. Every time she left her house, she felt like she was being observed, but there was never anyone in sight. It was as if the fear itself was beginning to close in around her, suffocating her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't until that night that the terror she'd been avoiding finally arrived at her door. It was late, long after the city had quieted down, when the phone rang again. This time, there was no distortion in the voice, just a cold, familiar tone that sent a shiver down her spine. "Stop digging, Laura. You're not the only one who's been warned. You're too close. We won't let you uncover the truth." The reality of what she was up against began to dawn on her. Whoever was behind this, whoever had been pulling the strings all along, wasn't going to stop until they silenced her for good. Laura dropped the phone, her hands trembling, her body cold with fear. She wasn't just investigating a mystery anymore. She was in the middle of something far darker than she ever imagined, and the danger was closing in fast. The voice hissed before abruptly hanging up. The words felt like a weight on her chest, suffocating. She rushed to the window, pulling the blinds aside, scanning the empty street below. The neighborhood appeared as still and quiet as ever, the streetlights casting long, dim shadows on the sidewalk. But Laura knew better now. She knew that silence didn't mean safety, not in a situation like this. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like the sound of impending doom. Was she being watched right now? Was someone out there, lurking just beyond the light? It was impossible to tell, but the sense of unease crawling up her spine told her that this was far from over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Laura's fears became a terrifying reality. When she went to her office, she was greeted by an empty desk. The note on the desk was scribbled hastily, almost desperately. "I can't do this anymore. I'm too scared. I'm leaving town, don't try to find me." The message was from her best friend, and the sinking feeling in Laura's stomach told her that something had gone terribly wrong. Her best friend, Grace, had always been there for her, offering support in times of need. But now, she was gone, disappeared without a trace, leaving nothing but a cryptic message and an overwhelming sense of dread. Laura tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. No one had seen her leave, and it didn't take long before Laura realized that Grace's sudden disappearance wasn't just a coincidence. This was part of something much larger, a web of fear and manipulation that had already claimed one victim and might claim another. In the days that followed, the unease in the pit of Laura's stomach grew unbearable. She couldn't shake the thought that her life was being meticulously controlled by unseen hands. There were times when she felt as though she were walking in a fog, not knowing where to step or who she could trust. She found herself jumping at every noise, her senses heightened, her body constantly on edge. No matter how much she tried to go about her daily life, the weight of the unknown kept her trapped in a spiral of paranoia and dread. It was during one of her sleepless nights that the doorbell rang. She hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect. But against her better judgment, she opened the door. Standing there, in the dim glow of the porch light, was a man she didn't recognize. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a grim expression etched onto his face. Without saying a word, he handed her another envelope, this one thicker than the last. He didn't wait for her to respond before walking away, disappearing into the darkness. Laura stood frozen for a moment, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her stomach churned as she tore it open, the sense of impending dread suffocating her every thought. Inside, she found a single photograph, one of her and Grace, taken years ago at a park they used to visit. It was an innocent picture, a happy memory, but what made Laura's blood run cold was the second part of the photo. Behind them, in the distance, a shadowy figure stood, almost invisible, staring directly at them. Someone had been watching them even then. Someone who had been tracking her every move for much longer than she had known. The photo sent a chill through Laura's body. She felt as if the walls were closing in around her, her mind racing to make sense of it all. Was this all connected to Richard? Had someone been following them? watching their every move, long before they even realized it. The image was an unsettling reminder that she wasn't in control of the situation. The game had changed. Whoever had been orchestrating this was now pulling at the strings of her life, manipulating her every step. Laura was no longer just a bystander in this dark narrative. She was a player in a dangerous game, and the stakes were rising by the second. Desperation clawed at her as she tried to put the pieces together. She couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. Grace was gone. The warnings were growing more threatening. And Richard? He was somewhere out there, his past tangled up in a web of lies, his secrets more lethal than anyone could have imagined. But the truth, if she could find it, was the only thing that could set her free. The only thing that could stop this nightmare from swallowing her whole. But with every step she took toward the truth, it seemed like the danger only grew. She was running out of time, running out of options, and the more she uncovered, the more she realized just how deep this conspiracy ran. As she sat there, the weight of everything crashing down on her, a sudden thought gripped her with terrifying clarity. What if the truth wasn't something she was meant to survive? What if uncovering the full story was more dangerous than she had ever imagined? And who, exactly, would be left standing when it was all over? Laura knew she had to keep going. She had no choice. But the further she ventured into the darkness, the more she realized that the true horror had only just begun. The tension had been building for weeks, and Laura thought she was finally starting to piece the puzzle together. She was convinced that Grace's sudden disappearance, the strange phone calls, and the cryptic messages were all part of a larger plan, something sinister that had been orchestrated by people she hadn't yet uncovered. But just as she was about to follow a new lead, something happened that completely shattered everything she thought she knew. It was late one night when the phone rang again. This time, there was no eerie voice, no warning, just a heavy silence on the other end. Laura hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. Then the voice finally spoke, familiar, too familiar. "Laura, it's me. You need to stop. You're looking in the wrong place." It was Grace's voice. Laura's heart skipped a beat. Grace? But how? She was supposed to be gone, vanished. The message didn't make sense, and yet there was no mistaking the fear in her voice. It wasn't the casual tone of someone trying to mislead her. It was raw, desperate. "Please, you don't know what you're dealing with. The truth isn't what you think it is. You need to let it go before it's too late." The line went dead before Laura could even respond. Shaking, Laura sat back, trying to process what had just happened. She had assumed Grace was a victim, too, another person swept up in the web of lies and manipulation. But now, something had shifted. Had Grace been involved all along? Was she playing a part in something darker than Laura could have ever imagined? Or had Grace truly been warning her, desperate to escape from the same nightmare Laura was now caught in? The next morning, still reeling from the call, Laura went to the one place where she felt like she could find answers, the place where it all began, Richard's house. The truth had to be buried there somewhere, and she couldn't stop herself from digging deeper. The house stood empty, still as cold as it had been when she first visited. She walked through the front door, each step echoing in the silence. The smell of dust and forgotten memories hung in the air. She moved slowly, almost as if she were expecting someone or something to jump out at her. It was when she reached the basement that things took a turn she never could have expected. The room she had once seen in the briefest of glimpses was now open, its secrets waiting to be revealed. As Laura stepped down the creaky wooden stairs, she noticed something was different, something that felt off. The shelves that had once been stocked with old tools and household items were now bare, except for one small, locked box sitting in the far corner. She had missed it the first time. Her fingers trembled as she approached, heart pounding. She didn't know what she was hoping to find, but something in her gut told her that this was the key to everything. With a swift motion, she broke the lock. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, but one particular picture caught her eye. It was a photo of Richard, but something was wrong. He was standing next to someone she didn't recognize. Someone whose face seemed oddly familiar. The man was smiling, but it wasn't the friendly smile of a family friend. It was cold, calculated, and chilling. What made Laura's stomach turn wasn't just the man's smile, it was the realization that she knew him. She had seen him before, but where? Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories. And then it hit her. He was someone who had been at the police station during her first investigation. He had been watching her from the shadows, slipping in and out of the background, unnoticed by everyone except her. Her pulse quickened as she reached for the next photograph. It was a close-up of Richard and the stranger again, but this time they were shaking hands. And written on the back of the photo in a sharp, unfamiliar hand was a single word: betrayal. Laura's hands went cold as she stared at the photo. What was going on? Who was this man? And why hadn't Richard ever mentioned him? Just as she was about to investigate further, Laura heard the creak of the stairs above her, the sound of someone entering the basement. Panic surged through her veins. She wasn't alone. She wasn't alone anymore. She turned, heart in her throat, and there, standing in the doorway, was someone she never expected to see: Grace. But something was wrong. Grace's face was pale, her eyes hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in days. The woman who had always been the calm, collected one was now trembling in front of her, fear written all over her face. "Grace? What are you?" Laura started, but Grace quickly stepped inside, her hand raised, a silent plea in her eyes. She closed the door behind her with a soft click and looked around the room, her gaze shifting nervously to the locked box in Laura's hands. "Don't open it," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just don't." Laura stared at her in confusion. "Why? What is going on here? Why are you—" "I'm sorry," Grace cut in, her voice breaking as if she were about to crack under the weight of something far more dangerous than Laura could imagine. "I never wanted you to find this. I never wanted you to know the truth. But it's too late. Now, they know you're close. And there's no going back from this." Laura's mind was spinning, each word Grace spoke sinking deeper into her thoughts like a shard of ice. "Who knows? Who are you talking about?" Grace hesitated for a moment before finally whispering, "It's Richard. He's not who you think he is. He's part of everything. This is bigger than you realize. You can't trust anyone." Just then, everything clicked. The photos, the strange man, the cryptic messages, it was all starting to make sense in a way that made Laura's stomach turn. What if Richard was behind all of this? What if he had been playing both sides, manipulating her the whole time? But before she could ask another question, the sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs, growing louder by the second. It wasn't just one person, it was several. And in that instant, Laura realized with cold clarity that she was no longer just involved in a mystery. She was at the center of something far darker, something she may never escape from. As the door to the basement opened and figures stepped into the dim light, Laura's world tilted. Nothing was what it seemed. Not anymore. The tension in the room was suffocating as Laura's mind raced, her thoughts tangled with the mess of secrets she had uncovered. Grace's warning echoed in her ears, but it was no longer enough to silence the gnawing curiosity that had taken hold of her. She had come this far, she had to know the truth. But the deeper she delved, the clearer it became that the answers she sought came at an unimaginable cost. As the footsteps grew louder outside the basement, Laura's heart began to race, the urgency of the moment crashing into her chest like a freight train. She could hear Grace's breathing, shallow and panicked, but the weight of what Grace had just said hung in the air like a thick fog. "Richard is part of everything." The words echoed in her mind, a constant, gnawing reminder that the man she thought she knew was at the center of this nightmare. "Grace," Laura whispered urgently, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What are you saying? You're telling me that Richard, he's the one behind all of this? How could you not tell me sooner?" Grace's eyes darted nervously to the doorway, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. She was shaking, barely holding it together. "I couldn't, Laura. I couldn't tell you because I was trying to protect you. You wouldn't believe me if I told you everything. And now it's too late. You're already too far in." Laura clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the impossible choice before her. The door behind them creaked as more footsteps approached, and she knew that soon they'd be trapped with nowhere to run. She couldn't just let it go. She couldn't walk away. But if Grace was telling the truth, if Richard really was a part of something so dark, so twisted, then what did that mean for Laura? What had she been walking into all this time? Her mind flashed back to the countless hours spent chasing down clues, to the nights she stayed awake poring over documents, to the way Richard had always been so calm, so collected. But now, she realized that every smile, every reassuring gesture, had been a carefully crafted mask, hiding the truth. Could she confront him? Could she face the man she thought she knew and accuse him of something so unimaginable? Before she could voice her fears, the basement door swung open, and in stepped Richard himself, his face a mask of calm. He looked almost out of place, his demeanor so composed it was chilling. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he looked at her, that made Laura's blood run cold. "Grace, I think it's time for you to leave," Richard said softly, but there was a dangerous edge to his voice that immediately set Laura on edge. "You've said enough." His eyes flicked toward Laura, and the weight of his gaze made her stomach churn. "I think it's time you and I had a conversation." Grace recoiled at his words, her face pale, as if she were a ghost of the woman Laura once knew. "You promised me you'd leave her out of this, Richard. You promised me." Laura could barely keep her composure as the reality of the situation hit her full force. Richard wasn't just a bystander. He was the architect of this entire twisted game. He had been playing them all along, using Grace to keep the truth buried, and now he was standing in front of her, cold and unmoving, daring her to confront him. For a moment, there was silence, heavy and suffocating, the air thick with the tension of 1,000 unspoken words. Laura's mind whirred as she processed the enormity of the choices in front of her. Could she confront him? Could she demand the truth, knowing that doing so might cost her everything, her safety, her life, or worse yet, the lives of the people she cared about? Richard's voice broke through her thoughts, low and insistent. "Laura, I know you found some things. I know you think you're on the verge of understanding the truth. But you're wrong. You don't know what you're dealing with. There are forces at play here that you can't even begin to comprehend." His eyes glinted with something she couldn't quite place. Was it pity? Or was it something darker, something more dangerous? "You have two choices now," he continued, his tone turning colder. "You can walk away from this. Forget everything you've learned. Walk away, and I'll make sure you're safe. Or—" He paused, his gaze flicking toward Grace, who was standing silently, trembling at his side. "Or you can stay and uncover the truth. But that will come at a price. You'll be in danger. You'll be hunted, just like everyone else who's gotten too close to the truth. And there's no guarantee that anyone, least of all you, will make it out alive." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Laura's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts racing as she considered what to do next. Could she trust him? Could she trust Grace? The room felt smaller with each passing second, the walls closing in, and the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. Richard's words lingered, echoing in her ears like a haunting refrain. Forget it all, or face the consequences. But could she really just let it go? Could she walk away from everything she had worked so hard to uncover? What was the truth worth if it meant losing herself? Or worse, losing the people she loved? "Time's running out, Laura," Richard said, his voice soft but chilling. "The clock's ticking, and you're getting closer to something you don't want to understand. You're already too far in. I'm just giving you a way out." Laura's hands shook as she stood frozen in the basement, her heart torn between two impossible choices. She could walk away, but that would mean letting him and everything he was involved in go unchecked. Or she could face him, confront the truth, and risk everything to uncover the dark secrets he had been hiding all this time. Before she could make her decision, Grace's voice trembled as she spoke, her words laced with fear. "Laura, please don't do it. You don't know what you're asking for. You have no idea what's going to happen if you keep going. Please trust me. Just let it go." The pleading in Grace's voice almost broke Laura's resolve, but then something inside her snapped. She couldn't back down now, not when she was so close to the truth. But as she made her choice, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into a darkness far deeper than she could imagine, a darkness where even the people she trusted might not be what they seemed. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Laura knew that whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The weight of Laura's decision hung like a noose around her neck as she stared at Richard, his cold eyes locked onto hers with a mixture of amusement and contempt. She had thought she was getting closer to the truth, but now, as the reality of what she was up against began to sink in, she realized how little she truly understood. She had uncovered only a fraction of the puzzle, and what she'd found was far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Richard's words lingered in the air, his offer of a way out seeming more like a threat than a choice. Forget it all, or face the consequences. Laura's blood ran cold as the weight of his ultimatum settled in her chest, but before she could respond, the door behind her slammed shut, and she spun around, her heart racing. In the darkened hallway beyond, two figures stood, one of them unmistakable. It was John. Laura's breath caught in her throat. John, her trusted colleague, the one person who had stood by her through everything, was here. But he wasn't the person she thought he was. His expression was unreadable, his eyes steely and emotionless as he stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. The sight of him set off a wave of disbelief, and a sickening realization crept over her. "John," she whispered, her voice a mix of confusion and horror. "What are you doing here?" John didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked toward Richard, and for a brief moment, Laura saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shared understanding between the two men. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't good. John took a slow, deliberate step forward, the air thick with tension. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his voice low and almost apologetic. "But you've gone too far. You should have stopped while you still could." Her world tilted. "What do you mean?" "John, I trusted you. You've been helping me weave. You've been a pawn in all of this," he cut her off, his voice hardening with every word. "You never should have gotten involved. You never should have started asking questions." A cold, hollow laugh escaped Richard's lips as he stepped forward, his expression almost smug. "You're wasting your time, Laura. You don't know who you're really dealing with. The conspiracy goes deeper than you think. John's not the only one playing a part in this. There are more of us, much more than you could ever imagine." Laura's head spun as the implications of Richard's words hit her all at once. The world she thought she knew was a lie, a fragile veneer that had been shattered by the cold truth. Everything she had uncovered, every lead she'd followed, had been carefully orchestrated to bring her to this point. The entire investigation had been nothing but a trap. John, who she had trusted with everything, had been working against her the entire time. She had been manipulated into digging deeper into a mystery that was never meant to be solved. And now, she was standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. Richard's voice was cold and smooth, like a snake coiling around its prey. "You think you've been uncovering secrets, Laura, but you're just a small piece in a much larger game. People like you don't have the power to expose what's truly going on. You've been working for us all along, whether you knew it or not." John stepped closer, his hand still resting on his weapon, but there was no longer any warmth in his expression. He was a stranger now, someone she didn't recognize. "I tried to protect you, Laura," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I tried to keep you from this, but it was always going to come to this. There's no way out now." Laura's pulse thundered in her ears as the weight of his betrayal crushed her. All the nights they spent working together, all the late-night phone calls, the shared moments of doubt, they had been lies. John wasn't her ally. He was part of the conspiracy, part of the very machine that had been orchestrating everything from the shadows. She staggered back, a chill running through her veins. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You." She stopped herself, feeling the sting of realization. She had trusted him. She had relied on him. But now, She was nothing more than a pawn in a game that was far beyond her control. Richard stepped in closer, his hand resting on the back of Laura's neck, his fingers like ice as he guided her toward the far corner of the basement. "You think you're in control here, Laura? You think you have the power to take down what's been years in the making? The people who control this, control everything, are far more dangerous than you could ever understand." A sudden, terrifying noise echoed from behind them, and Laura whipped around, her eyes scanning the shadows in the dim light. There, in the doorway, was another figure, one she hadn't seen before. The newcomer's eyes were hidden beneath a mask, but the glint of something sharp in their hand sent a jolt of fear through her body. A new player, someone from the very depths of this conspiracy, had emerged, and they were ready to take things to the next level. As Laura's mind raced, trying to process the sudden influx of new threats, Richard's voice cut through the chaos. "This is bigger than you, Laura. It's bigger than anyone you've ever known. You think you're the hero in this story? You think you're the one who can fix this? The truth is, you're already too far gone. The web is already closing in on you." The air was thick with danger now, as if every breath she took might be her last. Laura felt the ground slip out from beneath her as the walls of her world came crashing down. Every person she thought she could trust was a lie. Every path she had taken led her deeper into a conspiracy that had no end. And now, standing in front of her, was a dark truth that was bigger than her, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She was running out of time. And in that moment, Laura realized the true scale of the danger she was facing. She wasn't just in danger of losing her life. She was about to become part of something far darker, far more twisted than she could ever have believed. And no matter how hard she fought, no matter how many pieces of the puzzle she uncovered, the truth would never be hers to control. The final confrontation was everything Laura had feared and more. The walls of the room seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the stench of betrayal and the weight of everything she had uncovered. She had been led here, deeper into the web of lies and deception, but now she was no longer a pawn. She had learned too much. She had crossed lines she could never undo. And there was no turning back. Richard stood at the center of the room, his expression cold and unfeeling as if the entire ordeal were nothing more than a game to him. He had been the mastermind behind everything, pulling strings from the shadows, manipulating everyone around him. The twists, the turns, the lies, all of it had been his design. Laura's heart hammered in her chest as she faced him, her mind racing with the truths she had pieced together. Every lead, every dead end, every betrayal had led to this moment. She had learned what was really happening. The conspiracy wasn't just about hidden rooms. It wasn't just about the secrets of a single father. It was about an entire network. A network that controlled everything. And now, she had the final piece of the puzzle. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Richard's lips curled into a grin, as if he could see the realization dawning on her, but Laura wasn't fooled. She wasn't the naive investigator anymore. She wasn't the girl who had trusted John, the one who had believed in the good in people. She was done with all of it. Her eyes narrowed, her mind sharper than it had ever been. The final piece of the puzzle had slipped into place, and it wasn't what she had expected. No, it wasn't just the father's hidden room. It was the depth of Richard's involvement in every crime she had been investigating. The murder, the manipulation, the cover-ups. He was the puppet master, and she had been dancing to his tune all along. But what truly shook her to her core, what pushed her to the brink of losing herself, was the final revelation that had come to light just moments before. Laura had seen something so unexpected, so mind-shattering, that it felt like the world beneath her feet had simply disappeared. She had found the hidden files on Richard's computer, a set of encrypted documents that had once seemed meaningless, but, after her meticulous digging, revealed something far more sinister. One of the names on that list wasn't just a random accomplice. It was someone close to her. Someone she had trusted without question. John. Her stomach lurched, a wave of nausea crashing over her. The man who had sworn to help her, who had been her rock, her ally through every step of this case. He was just as deep into this conspiracy as Richard. Maybe deeper. He had been working alongside Richard the entire time, feeding her false leads, guiding her toward dead ends, while all along playing her like a fiddle. She thought she knew the people in her life. She thought she had understood who could be trusted. But now nothing made sense. Richard saw the look in her eyes and laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "You're still shocked, aren't you? You really thought John was a hero, that he was on your side." His words hit like a punch to the gut, but Laura couldn't afford to feel that sting anymore. There was no time for doubt, no time for weakness. She had one choice left, to take him down, no matter the cost. Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, full of venom and certainty. "You think you've uncovered everything, Laura? You think you've won? You don't understand. This is bigger than you. Bigger than John, bigger than me. You're just a small part of the plan. You always have been." The words twisted in her mind, but she couldn't let them distract her now. Richard was toying with her, trying to break her, trying to keep her off balance. She couldn't let it work. She had to be smarter. She had to take the control back. Without warning, the room went dark, and the sudden silence was suffocating. Panic flared in her chest, her senses alert, her body coiled like a spring. Richard's voice cut through the darkness, cold and amused. "You think this is the end? No, Laura. This is only the beginning." A flicker of movement caught her eye, and before she could react, the door to the hidden room burst open. She spun around, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. A figure emerged from the shadows, John. He was here, standing at the doorway, his face unreadable, a gun held loosely at his side. But it wasn't the gun that made her freeze. It was the expression on his face. The way he looked at her, as if she was a stranger, as if all the years they had spent working together had never meant anything. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Laura's mind raced as she tried to process everything. She had thought she knew John. She had thought they had shared the same goal, the same commitment to uncovering the truth. But now, everything was falling apart. The betrayal was complete. And what came next would change everything. "John," she whispered, the weight of the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. John didn't move. He didn't even blink. His hand tightened around the gun, and in that moment, everything Laura had believed in shattered. The man who had been her ally, the one person she thought she could trust, had just crossed the final line. He wasn't here to help her. He was here to end it. But just as she took a step back, something unexpected happened. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the room, but it wasn't aimed at her. John fell to the ground with a sickening thud, his body jerking in the darkness. The world seemed to freeze in that moment, the chaos of the past few minutes becoming a blur. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered back on. Standing there in the doorway, holding the smoking gun, was someone Laura had never expected to see. A face she had only seen in photographs, a name she had once heard in passing but never thought twice about. Her own father. The truth, it seemed, had just taken an even darker turn. The room fell into an eerie silence, the smoke from the gunshot still lingering in the air as Laura stood frozen, trying to comprehend what had just unfolded before her. Her mind raced as she looked down at John's lifeless body, sprawled on the cold concrete floor, his blood slowly staining the ground beneath him. But it wasn't the sight of John's death that rattled her. It was the man standing just a few feet away, her father. The same man she had spent her whole life believing was an innocent bystander to the chaos that had consumed her investigation. The man she had never truly understood. The one who had always seemed distant, elusive, never quite a part of her life, but never truly absent either. Now, standing before her, he wasn't just a father. He was a key player in everything, every lie, every death, every betrayal. His cold eyes met hers with an unsettling calmness, as if the years of secrets, the violence that had led to this moment, had been nothing more than a business transaction. No emotion, no remorse. Just the same chilling indifference she had seen from Richard. And now it all made sense. The web, the manipulation, the destruction, he had been a part of it from the very beginning, pulling strings in the background while she had been searching for answers. It wasn't just Richard who had masterminded the conspiracy. It wasn't just the lies and manipulation that had driven this twisted narrative. It was him. It was her father. And with his revelation came the cold realization that she was standing in the middle of a dark, tangled mess far larger than she had ever imagined. For a moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the deaths, the shattered friendships, crushed her chest, and for the first time since this all began, she wanted to give up. She wanted to walk away from the bloodshed, the confusion, the horror. But then she remembered why she had started this journey. She remembered the families that had been torn apart by this man, the countless victims whose voices had been silenced by the people she once trusted. She remembered the truth. And the truth was this. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them. Her father took a step forward, his face still unreadable. "You never understood, did you, Laura?" he said, his voice low, almost condescending. "You think this is over? That killing John was the end? This was never about just one man. It was always bigger than you. Bigger than all of us. You've only scratched the surface. You think you've uncovered the truth, but there's so much more lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered." His words hit her like a hammer. There was more? The sickening realization sank in. She had thought this was the end, her victory, her justice. But it wasn't. This was only the beginning. The world she had known, the life she had lived, the people she had trusted, all of it had been a lie. Her entire existence had been manipulated, twisted, and she had no idea what to believe anymore. But even as the darkness closed in, Laura didn't break. She couldn't. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. Her heart raced, her thoughts scattered, but she forced herself to focus. There was one question that still lingered, a question that she had to ask. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite herself. "Why did you do all of this?" Her father's expression softened just slightly, as if the answer were something simple, something he had always known. "Because I had no choice, Laura. Do you really think I could have stopped any of it? Do you think I could have walked away from this, knowing what I knew? People like Richard, people like us, don't walk away. Not once you've made your choice." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, but as she listened, something in Laura shifted. She had spent so much of her life searching for answers, but maybe there was no easy answer to be found. Maybe there was no sense to be made out of the chaos that had consumed her, no way to make the pieces fit into a neat, tidy puzzle. Sometimes, things were just broken. Sometimes, the truth wasn't what you expected it to be. Laura's gaze fell to John's body once more, the man who had betrayed her, who had been her closest ally, the one person she had trusted more than anyone. And yet, he was gone, his life snuffed out in a single moment. A single choice. She hadn't wanted it to end this way. She hadn't wanted to believe that the people closest to her were capable of such betrayal. But here she was, standing in the aftermath of everything she had ever known. Her father's footsteps echoed as he turned away, his back to her as he headed toward the door. He stopped just before he reached it, pausing for a moment, as if considering something. "You'll never escape it, Laura," he said without turning around. "None of us will. The deeper you dig, the more you'll uncover. But remember this, some truths are better left buried. Some questions are better left unanswered." And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows from which he had emerged, leaving Laura alone in the silence of the room. For a long time, Laura stood there, motionless, as the weight of it all crashed down on her. She had solved the mystery. She had uncovered the darkest secrets of her own family. But in doing so, she had found herself standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The story wasn't over. The battle wasn't won. There were still people out there, still whispers in the shadows, still dark truths waiting to be uncovered. And Laura knew, deep down, that her search for answers would never truly end. As she walked away from the scene, the truth still ringing in her ears, she couldn't shake the feeling that something much worse was coming. Something bigger. something that would make everything she had been through seem like a mere footnote in a much larger story. The questions still haunted her, and as she stepped into the night, she couldn't help but wonder, was she ready for the truth, or would it destroy her? The screen faded to black, but the lingering question stayed with the audience, hanging in the air, leaving them with the unsettling feeling that the story, like so many others, was far from over.